18 years ago, 3 innocent lives were left behind because they didn't look like their parents, rejected at birth, and abandoned without a second thought. Their future seemed uncertain, but destiny had other plans. You won't believe how this story unfolds. Stay tuned and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel for more gripping narratives. At St. Joseph's Medical Center in Charleston, South Carolina, 3 cries echoed through the delivery room, piercing the air with the raw sound of new life. Triplets, a boy and 2 girls, entered the world. Their tiny faces were full of innocence, their skin a rich dark brown that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The nurses smiled, wrapping them in soft blankets, ready to place them into their parents' waiting arms. But the joy evaporated the moment Henry and Susan Miller saw them. Susan's breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide with shock. She looked to her husband, searching for comfort, but found only cold disbelief. Henry stood rigid, his face pale, his fists clenched. He didn't move closer. He didn't speak. His silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. "They're beautiful," a nurse whispered, trying to ease the tension, but the words fell flat. Susan's shoulders sagged, her body trembling as she looked at the babies again. Their skin, so much darker than hers or Henry's, seemed to mock her, shattering everything she thought she knew. She reached out, her fingers hesitating, then pulled back, her heart twisting painfully. Henry's voice cut through the air, cold and final. "We need time to think." His words were sharp, leaving no room for argument. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Susan watched him leave, her chest tightening, her world collapsing. She didn't follow. She couldn't. Her feet felt rooted to the floor, her mind numb with disbelief. The nurses exchanged worried glances. They tried to place the babies in Susan's arms, but she shook her head, her eyes distant and empty. She whispered, I just need a moment," before turning away, her shoulders hunched in defeat. The nurses carried the triplets to the nursery, laying them side by side in a single crib. Their tiny hands reached out, finding each other, clinging to the only warmth they knew. But no one came to hold them. No one whispered promises of love or comfort. They were alone. That night, Henry and Susan made their decision. They refused to see the babies again. They signed away their parental rights, their names scrawled hastily across documents that felt cold and final. "It's impossible," Henry muttered, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the floor. "They can't be ours." His denial was fierce, unyielding, a shield against the truth he could not face. He looked to the birth records. He was recorded as their biological father. The truth had eaten at him and Susan since the birth, something that never should have been written into official documentation. Susan's heart shattered as she wrote her name, tears blurring her vision. She had known. For years the guilt had eaten at her. A fleeting summer fling, an uncharacteristic few months which she was ashamed, all swept under the rug, all came crashing down today. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to understand how this could be happening, but her voice was gone, swallowed by fear and shame and what this might do to Henry. She set the pen down and walked away, her body hollow, her soul heavy. She did not look back. Neither did Henry. The hospital staff watched them leave, whispers rippling through the halls. Some spoke of hidden genetics, ancient ancestry that had resurfaced unexpectedly. Others murmured about fear and shame, about a man who could not accept children who did not reflect his image. But no one truly understood. No one could. The triplets were left behind, nameless and alone, their cries echoing through the nursery. Nurses took turns holding them, whispering soft lullabies, trying to fill the void left by parents who could not stay. But they knew it wasn't enough. Love from strangers could not heal the wound of abandonment. Days passed, and the stories spread through the hospital, whispered with pity and disbelief. 3 infants, perfect and innocent, cast aside because they didn't look like the parents who were documented to have made them. There was quiet concern about their future. Who would take in 3 babies at once? Especially with the scandalous story already attached to their names. Would they be separated? Their bond broken before they even knew the world? For now, the triplets lay together, their tiny fingers entwined, their breaths synchronized. They had no names, no identity beyond each other, but they were not broken, not yet. Their journey was only beginning, and the world was about to show them that love could come from the most unexpected places. In Somerville, news traveled fast, and whispers about 3 abandoned babies reached Andrew and Emily Lawson quickly. 3 infants left behind, not because of illness or poverty, but because they didn't look like their parents. It seemed cruel, unfair, but it was real. Emily's heart sank as she heard the story. Andrew saw the pain in her eyes, the familiar ache that had haunted them for years. They had tried for so long, prayed for a family, but their arms remained empty until now. "They need us," Emily said, her voice trembling. Andrew knew then that they would go, that they would see the babies, that their lives were about to change. They arrived at St. Joseph's Medical Center, nervous but resolute. A nurse led them to the nursery, her expression soft with hope. "They've been together since birth," she explained. "They only sleep when they're touching. It's like they already know they need each other." Andrew and Emily stood over the crib, looking down at 3 tiny faces, peaceful and perfect, a boy and 2 girls, their dark eyes closed, their fingers curled around each other's hands. Emily's heart swelled, tears pricking her eyes. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the boy's soft cheek. "Ethan," she whispered. The name felt right, like it was always meant for him. Andrew's voice was rough with emotion as he looked at the first girl, her tiny lips curved in a gentle sigh. "Grace," he murmured, his heart tightening. The third lay close, her face serene, her body pressed against her sister's. "Maya," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "Our little Maya." 3 names, 3 souls who needed them. Andrew felt his chest tighten, his decision solidifying. "All 3, he said, his voice firm. "They stay together. We're their family now." Emily nodded, her tears falling silently. "Yes, all 3. Within weeks, the adoption was finalized. They brought the triplets home to Somerville, knowing their lives would never be the same. The triplets grew, surrounded by love and security. Ethan was gentle and empathetic, always the first to comfort his sisters. Grace was curious, her eyes wide with wonder, always asking questions. Maya was bold, her laughter filling the house, her spirit unbreakable. They were happy, thriving, loved, but the world was waiting, ready to question their place, their identity. Andrew and Emily knew the questions would come, knew the stares would follow them, but they were ready. They would face it together, as a family. The world would have its doubts, but their love was unwavering. They were the Lawsons now, bound not by blood, but by choice, by commitment, by love. The triplets grew up surrounded by love. To them, Andrew and Emily were simply mom and dad. They didn't think about skin color until the world forced them to. At school, questions started innocently. "Why don't you look like your parents? Are you adopted?" The triplets shrugged them off, but the stares grew heavier, whispers more pointed. They heard the word different too often, spoken with a tone that felt like a judgment. By age 10, the questions came home with them. Grace's eyes were wet when she asked, "Why don't we look like you?" Her voice was small, fragile, as if afraid of the answer. Andrew's chest tightened. He had known this day would come, but was still unprepared for the pain in her eyes. He pulled her close, his arms firm, his heart breaking. "Because love doesn't look like anything," he said softly. "It feels like this." Emily wrapped her arms around them both, her voice steady. "We chose you. That's what matters." But Grace's eyes held questions they couldn't answer, doubts they couldn't erase. The triplets faced stares wherever they went. Neighbors watched them too closely. Strangers whispered behind polite smiles. They felt the weight of curiosity, of judgment. The whispers grew sharper as they got older, suspicion and misunderstanding twisting into prejudice. "Are they really yours?" someone asked once, eyes narrow. Andrew's jaw tightened, his chest burning with anger, but he answered calmly, "Yes, they are ours." He held his head high, refusing to justify his family to strangers who couldn't see beyond skin color. But the damage was done. The triplets heard the questions, absorbed the doubts. They began to wonder where they truly belonged. Grace turned to books, searching for answers in pages filled with history and identity. Ethan grew quiet, his eyes thoughtful, his shoulders heavier. Maya fought back with boldness, her chin high, defiance in her eyes. But at night, she would curl up beside Grace, her voice small. "They're wrong, right?" she would whisper. Grace would hold her tight, her heart heavy. "Yeah, they're wrong." But the fear lingered. Andrew and Emily saw the questions growing, saw the pain their children carried. They did their best to shield them, but they couldn't change the world's prejudice. They could only stand firm, loving fiercely, refusing to let ignorance break them apart. As teenagers, Ethan, Grace, and Maya excelled. Ethan poured his emotions into music. Grace devoured knowledge, and Maya's speed on the track left crowds speechless. But their successes didn't silence the questions. It only magnified the whispers. Where did they come from? Why don't they look like their parents? The judgments were silent but heavy, lingering in every stare. The triplets felt the weight of being different, of not fitting into society's narrow expectations. Ethan became quiet, his laughter fading. Grace's curiosity grew sharper, her questions more pointed. Maya's boldness turned defensive, anger simmering beneath her bright smiles. They were loved, they were cherished, but they were lost. One evening, sitting around the dinner table, Grace's voice broke the silence. "Why did they leave us?" The words hung heavy, unanswered. Ethan looked at his hands, his fingers tightening. Who are they? Do they even care? Maya's jaw clenched, her eyes fierce. We need to know. Andrew and Emily had prepared for this moment, but it didn't ease the pain. They shared the truth, raw and honest. Your birth parents, they chose to leave, but that choice was theirs, not yours. You were always enough. You are enough. Andrew's voice wavered, his eyes pleading for them to understand. Emily's fingers gripped his, her resolve steady, but the answers weren't enough. The triplets needed closure, needed to face the shadows of their past. They looked at each other, unspoken words passing between them. Ethan's shoulders straightened, his eyes steady. We have to find them. Grace and Maya nodded, determination hardening their faces. They needed the truth, no matter how painful. Andrew's heart clenched, fear tightening his chest, but he saw the resolve in their eyes. The courage that refused to back down. We'll help you, he said quietly. We'll face this together. Emily's voice was soft but fierce. We are a family. That won't change, no matter what. Determined to find closure, Ethan, Grace, and Maya searched for their biological parents. They knew the names of the parents through the birth certificates, which, up until this point, never told the truth they assumed, with the belief of Thomas on their being true biological parents, until the day of birth. They needed answers to understand who they were and why they were left behind. With Andrew and Emily's support, they prepared a letter to them both, brief and direct. We are your children. We need to know why you left us. Weeks passed in silence until a reply came, a simple invitation by Susan. We will meet you. Come. It gave the impression of this request being organic on their end, but truth lay bare.